Welcome to A Flash of Beauty, the podcast, an audio experience dedicated to the further exploration of Bigfoot and the people Bigfoot has revealed itself to. What started as a documentary of personal narrative encounter stories and expert testimony has now shifted into a deeper inquiry into the forever changed lives of those that have witnessed firsthand this hidden truth. My name is Tobe Johnson, co-producer of Flash of Beauty Bigfoot Revealed. Join me along with the crew and creators of this doc, director Brett Eichenberger, producer Jill Rimmon-Snyder, and cinematographer Michael Ferry, as we go back into the trees to sit down once again with each guest in search of the truth, no matter how strange. All right, back with me again is cinematographer Michael Ferry, producer Jill Rimmon-Snyder, and director Brett Eichenberger. And today's guest, all the way from Bandon, Oregon, is lead plumber Stan Avery and Bigfoot witness. And I would say that he's the guy that named the darn documentary A Flash of Beauty. So we have a heck of an interview here, guys. Tell me what you thought.
Wow, maybe 5 stars. Stan is quite the character, and he is the great collector of Sasquatch stories. They made Stan and then broke the mold. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, when we interviewed Stan for the documentary, that was a documentary in and of itself. I mean, that was a character study, and someone who's traveled the world, seen and heard many things, and had a lot of opinions about things. And he is just one of those people that he's such a great he's so great with words.
He's a natural orator. Like, he's one of the guys that you would meet in the old time, standing on the corner, and you would just hear about the day's events.
You'll hear from Stan at the end of the podcast that he's in this to meet people. He's in this to hear stories, and ultimately, I think we kind of have a shared goal in the fact that we're trying to normalize this. We're trying to make these stories, people have these stories and they happen, and we're both trying to, we're all trying to get these stories out as a group, and we've got a shared goal in that, and that's ultimately why I think Stan is so popular with the viewers.
We get into this map too. If you haven't seen Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot Revealed, you can watch it anywhere documentaries are streaming. We really don't mention it enough. We're trying to get Stan to come out to Forks for part 2, which again is going to be playing at the second annual Forks Sasquatch Days in Forks, Washington. You can get tickets now. It's $50 for all day on Saturday. You can do a 3-day pass for a little bit more. It's going to be Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and part 2 is on Friday evening. And there may be some surprises on Saturday as well. So you want to show up for that. Hopefully we can get Stan out there for this as well. And but we get into a couple of things here. One of the things I didn't get a chance to mention to Stan was this map business. And just to reiterate here, because I can't re-edit what we've already done, is the fact that there's a map that comes up in this documentary that was given to me as well as screenshotted by Stan. In the case of my map, just to reiterate here to the folks online that haven't heard this, and you folks listening, is that when you watch this documentary, you'll see a colored BLM map. In the case of when I was given this map, it was circa 2011 timeframe, I believe, near the town of Elkton, Oregon. And in short, a BLM worker invited me out to his house in Coos Bay to relay his Bigfoot sighting to me. And as I was sitting in his house with his wife and his son sharing a Coors banquet, he went and got his logbook, because you have to keep everything on file when you're out in the forest as a BLM worker. And at the end of the interview, describing his incredible encounter of seeing a Sasquatch on a skid road, eating mushrooms, he suspected. Of course, he called him a man in a fur coat that was standing up, but it wasn't a man in a fur coat. He said, "Do you want to see the map?" and he proceeded to unroll this map that Stan Avery has pretty much a likeness of. And this map was incredibly detailed. He gave the map to me. I took it back home to Eugene, and about 2 days later, I get a voicemail. The voicemail was from his son that said, "My dad shouldn't give you that map. He's been bragging at work about you coming by. He's going to get fired unless he gets that map back." And I was hesitant for a second, but man, this guy had only a couple years to retire. And so I went down, I think I had a Samsung Galaxy, and I hung the map up quickly on the side of the cedar fence and got a quick video. And then I FedExed the map back to him. So the map stands as, I guess, credible proof to not only Stan's story, but the fact that government workers know about this phenomena. Stan knows government workers that are also in this documentary. Remind me of the name that gets brought up over and over again, Brett, as far as the government worker that he's referring to in the documentary.
Stuart Love is the man's name, and we interviewed Stuart ourselves, and he's featured in the documentary.
Yeah, so there seems to be this overlap, and we get into this overlap of maybe how the ODFW, the BLM, forestry workers, and these shadowy organizations, that they seem to know something about this phenomenon. I think you're going to be surprised at the answer that was given about what's going on with this Bigfoot phenomena. It's an incredible interview. Stan is just a wealth of information. We're lucky to have him in the doc and lucky to have this interview. So if you guys don't have any further questions, let's press forward here and go ahead and showcase our interview with the incredible 5-star Angie's List plumber, Stan Avery, and his Bigfoot story. All the way from Bandon, Oregon, Stan Avery, owner-operator of Avery Plumbing. Hello, Stan.
Hello.
It's great to have you on board here for Flash Beauty, the podcast. Tell folks a little bit about your origin story, because as it relates to the documentary, we never really get into how you go from 5-star Angie's List plumber to this Sasquatch database that gets all these stories here. So tell people a little bit about yourself.
Well, actually, the two go together very well, because as a plumber, I've been doing this for decades. I'm in people's homes all the time, and I have the gift of gab, and we get to talking, and people trust their plumber. And so years and years and years ago, I just started talking to people about Bigfoot, just bringing it up kind of as a throwaway, just to see what people would do. And it was astonishing how so many of my customers, at first, it was like a broken record. They would say, "Oh, I don't believe in that stuff." And then I go, "Oh, okay." But they would know that I did, that I knew they were real because I grew up, around them, and my wife as well. And I'll tell you more about that later. But anyway, what would happen is almost invariably, maybe a half hour or an hour later, I'm doing the plumbing, and they'll come up and go, "Well, here's what happened to me." And they'll tell me their stories. And a lot of them were stories they had never told anyone before. And so I started recording them, and now I've got this really thick file, and I'm still collecting more of them. I actually have a few more that came to me recently that are fascinating. And so I just keep collecting them. My wife grew up on the edge of the Lumi Indian Reservation, which is actually mentioned in the documentary in Flash of Beauty. And she just grew up. Bigfoot was another animal in the woods. And she was astonished at 19 in college to meet a girl that thought Bigfoot wasn't real. So she just grew up around it. And my dad was the chief of police in Philomath. And he's told us, he said back in the 40s and 50s that we didn't have the name Bigfoot. He said we called them the big smelly apes. He said there was a family of them that lived southwest of Philomath, and we knew they were there. We kept quiet about it and just left them alone. He said they were huge, they smelled bad, and we just, some of the neighbors would put food out for them. And this was a long time ago. And so he said that's just the way it was, but we didn't want to talk about it because we didn't want people coming in with guns. We didn't want to get the government involved. So we just kind of left them alone. And so, so that's my background. And but now I've got this plethora of reports from my customers, and now there's a lot of other people that have contacted me, and actually there's this amazing observation that came to us recently. I think I mentioned it to the team when they were here. Steve Nibbler, and he had an amazing time watching one with high-powered binoculars just southwest of Roseburg, Oregon. So I have lots more accounts that people are telling me about, and I just keep track of them.
Stan, when it comes to the name of the documentary, it's just so cool that in the documentary you just kind of name it, and everyone just borrowed this beautiful title, Flash of Beauty. Tell people about that story. Remind them why there was a flash.
It's actually an accumulation of the reports that people have given me of their experience. As you'll learn from this, if I sing this song for you, it's they don't pose for photos, and whenever someone would see them, they're so fast, and that's all you get is just this amazing flash, and they're gone, and then you're thinking, what was that? And that's actually not an unusual experience. That's very common. People will see it, and it'll just be moving so fast, and there's just a flash, but you know what you saw. And it's another thing to convince someone else, because everyone will say, well, it was just a bear. And also, there's a lot of people that I've found that have seen them and wondered what they saw. And then when they would meet other people that knew they were real, then they would go, that's what it was then. I thought, who's going to see a bear sprinting on two legs? And it doesn't make any sense. And there's this huge animal. And so it's been a great relief for a lot of people, but that's just a way that they would describe it so commonly, is they would have this experience where they would just see it running. It would just take off running. And of course, everyone's experience is different, but there is commonality. And so I just said, it's a flash of beauty. You just see this thing, and it's amazing. And of course, they're huge. They're rather intimidating. But that's, it's very rare that people get to just like sit and watch one. It's very, very unusual. I had an uncle that used to, my dad's brother, and he would climb up in this tree in this high place and sit for a long time, and he would wait until this family that was southwest of Philomath back in the early 50s would come by, and he would watch them, but very seldom does somebody get to see one at all. Now they see us all the time, I believe, but every once in a while we get to blunder onto one of them.
Dan, you bring up a great point. They do. They see us, but we don't see them. I've heard lots of people say that. This is Brett, by the way. I know you're on the phone.
Yes, yes.
I read something, maybe it was on Facebook or someplace else, where some scientist came out someplace. I don't even know where this guy was based, but he said, oh yeah, Bigfoot sightings are most likely black bear. And, the collective of us here in this podcast tonight know that that's not true. And one of the things that I think we all really loved about you is the quality of the people that have had these sightings is unmatched. I mean, these are pillars of society. Many of these people that are your customers have been your customers for years, and they don't want their names out there, not because of the
some of them. Yeah. You're right.
Yeah, they know what they've seen, right?
Yes. And like some of them are like, business owners, pillars in the community. There was one recently, and I know I've mentioned it to you guys, and I'm hoping he is prepared to be interviewed, but he's like a renowned citizen in the Roseburg community. And he had a sighting. He didn't know they were real. But he's the one that for 90 seconds watched one in broad daylight against thin snow through high-powered binoculars, and a lot of people that were very skeptical, unbelieving. They would make fun of me, which I don't care. I'm happy with it. It's their problem. But a lot of those people now have come to me and said, Stan, that's it. If Steve Nibbler saw one, they're real, and that settles it. And because of his reputation in the community, it was just unassailable. And a lot of times people don't want to believe that they're there for a myriad of reasons. Sometimes it's just kind of a fearful thing, but they just it bothers them, and they want to know that they have a clear understanding of their entire world. And it's ironic, there are so many mysteries to this life. I mean, what percentage of species have we even identified in this world? It's actually, I think, a minority still.
It's true. It's true.
Stan, you're a pillar of the community as well. I would imagine that this film has brought you out of the woodwork even more so as the Bigfoot guy in Bandon. So has that happened to you? Has the documentary, brought some recognition to you?
Yes, incrementally. I mean, I've been doing this for decades and collecting these stories, and I'm an extremely secure person. And so, if somebody says, "Well, I don't believe that," I think, well, that's their problem. To me, it's like silly because there are so many credible reports, and there are so many. There's quite a bit of photography and video clips and things like that. There's no logical explanation for all of that, and so I'm just kind of used to it. But I do have people now contact me and saying, "Well, here's what happened to me." Actually, I had one just very recently. That a woman that works at the bank here, and she tied together because she trusted me, and she said, "I know you want to know this," and she tied together a mystery from 20 years ago, the girl's birthday party on the Sixes River. It's quite an account, and it was left kind of like completely unfinished. The story was just kind of hanging there until just very recently, and finally, the woman who clammed up came forward and said, "Okay, here's what happened to me." And there were these, I don't know if you want me to tell you all the details of it. It's an amazing account.
Yes, please. I think we
Okay.
all.
All right. So 20 years ago, there was, I'll be brief, there was a birthday party way out in the woods in this home on the Sixes River. And two of these girls decided, let's be adventurous and go for a walk. And so they went walking down this trail way off into the woods during the day. And they walked underneath a tree, and up in the tree, sitting there with his legs dangling, was a huge ape with red eyes staring right at them. And both the girls just flipped out, ran all the way back to the birthday party, burst in and was saying, "There's this huge ape up in a tree out here." And of course, they just made fun of them. Well, one of the girls didn't really care. She held on to her story. The other woman clammed up completely after that outburst, and it just freaked her out. And so she's the one who told her friend in the bank, now 20 years later, "Look, I got to tell somebody, this is what happened to me." And so there are these two women here in the community who had this experience, and they have not changed their story. And it leads us to the larger story, which is that area. If you look on that map, the federal map I have, and of course there's that new map now, which is an amazing production, but there's like a string of pearls. There's a bunch of sightings, government official sighting locations on the Sixes River and the Elk River. And of course, like that picture that we have of a juvenile Bigfoot sitting up in a dead snag that was taken recently, that was on the Elk River. But between those two rivers, there's this huge wilderness area, and no one goes there. That famous line from Lord of the Rings, one does not simply walk into Mordor. Remember that line? And this wilderness area is like that. And there are no trails. If you want to go in there, you're going to basically be splashing and swimming up a creek somewhere, because it is so extremely rugged and remote and steep. You can't just go hiking there. And so it's out on the outside edges of that wilderness area that is just impassable. People don't go there. Well, I've been there a couple of times, and boy, I tell you, well, I went there with my wife, and the Bigfoot that made it really clear to us, you had better leave now, or you're next. And we had a terrifying experience in there, and we left and never went back there. And then also we hiked in another place trying to get in there, and we just basically just got soaked walking up this creek, and there was no place to hike. On the way out, near the mouth of the creek, we ran into a couple of forestry officials that were measuring the gravel for the salmon spawning, and they were astonished. They said, "We've never known anybody that has ever been where you guys were." And they said, "What's it like?" And we told them it was terrible, not a place to go hiking. But so there's this huge wilderness area between those two rivers that the Bigfoot can hide in. And actually, back in the 1800s, when there were gold mines on the Sixes, that was where they had those battles. And Teresa, my wife, she does this huge amount of research, and she's researched all these old publications where you have to go into these archives in the library and look at these local newspapers from the late early 1900s. And she's found a number of articles that speak very mundanely about the big apes, and that they live back there, and there's a whole tribe of them that live at the headwaters of the Sixes River. And the Indians, of course, we know the Indians always just recognize it as who they are. There's just these big dangerous creatures that live way off in the woods, and they had different names for them. That's, I think, where the name Sasquatch came from. But anyway, that wilderness area there is just a perfect habitation for the Sasquatch, because no one goes there. And the one time that Teresa and I went there, we actually had to have rope and rappel in. It was so steep, and we got in there, and then we were going down this crazy crashing creek. And then there was a little level place, and we were just kind of walking along, and with a friend of ours that went in there, and there, growing out of the rocks by the side of the creek, there was this real healthy Doug fir, maybe like about 3-inch diameter, the kind that would grow underneath a big old growth forest, and then it would eventually die unless a tree fell over, and then it would replace it. That's how it works. So here's this really healthy Doug fir tree, and just before we walked up, something really big with hands had taken that tree and had broken it into multiple pieces and stripped the branches off and left it in a neat pile. And we were speechless, stood there looking at this thing. What just happened? I went through the whole thing looking for a tooth or a claw mark. There was nothing. Something with hands had just demolished that tree. Not just broken it down, broken it into pieces and stripped it and left it in a pile. And it was a very clear message: you leave now. And I knew that it was watching us. It was obvious. You could still smell the pitch in the air. It was so obvious. So we left, never went back there. We got the memo. And so that area there, it's a huge area, dozens and dozens of square miles. And boy, people that doubt, how could the Bigfoot be hiding? Well, all you need to do is just take one airplane trip over the forests, and you look down and you think, yeah, plenty of room to play hide and seek.
Absolutely. Stan, I was just looking at a map of the Sixes River, and it was following it up into the Coast Range going east. And it's winding, it switches back. I mean, you're talking about it's some of the most remote wilderness in the state of Oregon. And you're exactly right. There is plenty of area for them to hide.
Yeah. And no one ever goes there except idiots like me. And I'd give up. I will not go back.
Stan, in the documentary, you go into detail about the dump near Bandon or Coos Bay. Talk to people about that dump and what's been done since, because I have questions as it relates to maybe what Sasquatch would be doing in that dump. But talk a little bit about that.
Well, background, because there have been some recent events, and we speak to the men there very plainly about the Bigfoot when we go there, because that's where we take our garbage. We go to the dump there. And there's a local historian and cartographer. His name is Ned Reed. And he's a squatcher, and he knows they're real. And he went to the trouble of, it took him a while. He would go there and he would talk to the employees at the dump about the Bigfoot. And of course, he ran initially into a 100% wall of denial. But eventually, and he kept at it, he was very persistent. 3 of the guys that worked there finally admitted, yeah, the Bigfoot do come and forage in the dump. And one of them said it very reluctantly. And there's guys that will tell us, they'll talk to us very plainly about it now, privately. Just like, for example, Stuart Love, the senior biologist for the ODF&W. He has to be very careful what he says, but in a private conversation, Stuart told me plainly, he said, we know they're there. He said, we keep track of them. And I knew about the BLM map. And he said, we have all kinds of forensic evidence, but he said, I am the lion at the gate for the Endangered Species Act for Southwest Oregon. And he said, if we ever admit publicly that the Bigfoot are real, he said, it will open such a can of worms. He said, we would have to lock up all the land from Sacramento to Alaska. He said, good governance is to keep it as a legend. And that's what we do. They do the same thing with the ivory-billed woodpecker in the southeast of the United States. There's all kinds of people, just like Bigfoot, that have they get video recordings, audio recordings. They have a very unusual call, and they have photographs. There's a lot of people, the locals, know that the ivory-billed woodpeckers are there. It's a really large woodpecker that is listed as extinct. The government knows they're there, but they keep it listed as extinct because if they ever admit that they're there, they've got a legal nightmare on their hands in terms of the pulling the trigger on the Endangered Species Act. So Stuart told me plainly, he says, we just we're polite, we're nice to people, but we keep it as a legend, and that's what we have to do, and that kind of makes sense to me. And they don't need our help, and there's it seems like a really good populace. If the reports that I've gotten and that you look at the maps, there's plenty of them, because they are, as Stuart told me, Stuart Love, he said they are extremely intelligent and extremely elusive, and he said my dream job would be if the state of Oregon would finally assign me to do the population count. I would love to do that because that's his job. He said they will never assign me that because they know I would fail, because you can't just go out there and count them like you can. I mean, a cougar is they're elusive, but they're dumber than a wall. But a Bigfoot, if he doesn't want to be found, that's not going to happen. And I think a lot of people, they think they see one, or they'll be walking along and they'll go, wait, I just saw something, it disappeared. And I think in many cases, the reason why it looks like it disappeared is because they just go straight up a tree. And they're obviously really good climbers. And so that's kind of the background to that. But as far as the dump, what they did was they just shaved the hills all around the dump. It's all completely clear cut, put in roads, everything, just clear cut the entire thing. And then they spent about $250,000. I asked one of the county commissioners to build this huge security fence around the dump. And when I asked them, I said, well, why did you build that? They said, well, we don't want people coming in here and people coming in here and trying to forage and steal things, meth heads or whatever like that. And I just laughed at them. I said, that's ridiculous. There's a gate at the highway. It's a 1/4 mile walk to get up to this new gate that they have, and then you have to climb over that to get in there. I said, who's gonna show up there? It doesn't make any sense. And they admitted that nobody's ever done any damage or anything. They said, well, just in case. We don't want people, breaking into our dump here. And it's like, oh, please, this is absurd. And also, I have in my collection about a dozen sightings of very credible people right in the proximity of the dump area, where people have actually seen them. One woman actually clipped a juvenile, and not very far from the dump. And so there's been a lot of sightings around there, because for generations, it was just the place to hang out because it's like a smorgasbord. Why would they not? But they're the only animal that can get into the dump and back out.
Yeah, I just wanted to suggest something real quick. That dump is on Seven Devils Road, is it not?
Yeah.
Well, Toad can kind of talk about this a little bit, but there's a lot of thought that a lot of thought that the names, some of the place names around the Pacific Northwest, with the name Devil in them, comes from the fact that people would hear those screams and and see things they couldn't explain, and they associated them with devils.
Well, even Stan, when you said the Sixes River, that's known as the Sixes Wildman case, right?
Yes, and Teresa and I are convinced that like the Seven Devils were named after these creatures, but there's so many geographic examples, especially in the Northwest, like up in Washington, Ape Canyon, really, and there are actually several several places where there are things like that. I found a really old map on the there's a mountain. Ironically, my last name is Avery, and there's a mountain called Avery Mountain, which is near the Sixes River, and you can find that on a map. And in a really old map, it talked about these. It mentioned these caves near the top of the mountain where the apes would live, and it was just this old map. That talked about that's where they would go. They had caves up there, and there's all kinds of things like when you read the newspaper accounts from the early settlers that lived here when they first started having newspapers in places like Myrtle Point. Myrtle Point is a real hotbed of per capita of Bigfoot sightings, and they would write about them. It wasn't like mystical or controversial. They would just write about the apes or the wild men or whatever they wanted to call it. And devils, of course, would be an appropriate name because they're hearing all these screams and what's making those noises, and that's not like any animal that we know. And the unknown it creates things in our fertile imagination. We tend to exacerbate in our minds, things and exaggerate rather, and what they are like. The unknown mystery just can be inspiring and can be very fearful. And so I think that's just what happens. But I think with very few exceptions, the Indian tribes, it was just another animal in the woods, and they avoided them, and the apes avoided the Indians, and so they got along just fine. But they knew about them, and of course it was included in their art. There's so many examples like that. Really not just here in the Northwest. Here in the Northwest, we've got it's really a rich environment for those creatures, but they're all over the place in Canada, in almost all of the United States, and of course the smaller version in the Southeast United States. They're everywhere, and they're just part of our culture. And when you go back in history and actually look for it, there's a lot of amazing historical accounts.
Hey, Stan, you talk about the historical accounts, and you talk about how, like at the turn of the century, how it was kind of spoken freely about in news publications. Now, I have had the opportunity to look through that binder of yours with all the stories you've collected, and you have some interesting news stories. I was wondering if you could talk about the reports from the Columbus Day storm that we had. If you're not familiar with Oregon, the Columbus Day storm is just part of our history. But also on top of that, you talked about an account of a young man who was either jogging or hiking, and he was told in the ER he was attacked by a cougar. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, oh, I know that account very, very well. He was a young man. His family was actually visiting from the East Coast, and they were visiting friends in Medford, Oregon. And he was a cross-country runner, and so he decided, I'm going to go. He went up north of the city, and there's all these just mountains and hills and roads and stuff. And he was up just doing cross-country running, just like I did when I was young, but I don't do anymore because I just turned 71. But anyway, he was running on a particular road, and he slipped on the edge of the road. There was just a boulder there, and he slipped and he fell down the hill a little ways and hit his head. And I read a detailed account of this, and it knocked him out. And when he came to, there was his head was bleeding, and he put his arm up, and he wiped his forehead with his arm and got blood on it. And squatting just up above him, not on him, but just up above him, was an ape, a huge ape with actually was light colored, and it was watching him. And as soon as he woke up, it jumped down, it grabbed his arm, snapped it off at the elbow, and just ran off with it, apparently as a snack. I mean, he didn't know it. It was just ran off, and he was in shock. He made it up to the road, and then serendipitously or providentially, a forest worker was driving by and saw the young man there laying by the side of the road, picked him up, took him to the hospital. And then in the hospital, he told them, when he was recovering, exactly what happened. He told the officials there, and they basically changed his story for him, and just said, there was an official report, and that this cougar, and a cougar isn't going to do that, isn't going to like remove your arm. The cougar actually is going to remove your neck. That's what they do, and they that's how they kill you. But it's something with hands had to snap that arm off. Anyway, so that was that account, and the report. He talked about it later, and he spoke about it very plainly. He wrote about it years later, and that's what happened. What was the other account you were referring to?
The Columbus Day storm.
Oh yeah. Now that was when I was a kid. I actually delivered newspapers in the Columbus Day storm, and there was massive devastation. There were in the Coast Range Mountains. There were entire mountains full of trees that were completely blown down. It was huge, the damage and the loss. Anyway, down near the California border, there was this female Bigfoot that was a tree blew over and trapped her and killed her. And the body was found. It wasn't too far from a road, and it was found. And there was a federal team of scientists that did an autopsy on that Bigfoot, a really detailed autopsy. And I have the notes from that autopsy. And there were actually two autopsies. There was one from Texas. There was actually a small family group of Bigfoot in Texas that were shot. They were killed with rifles, and these federal workers actually came in and did an autopsy on that. I have the notes from both of those autopsies, and what happened was the man who was the federal scientist, he retired and lived in he was in Colorado, and he died, and his brother found his report of these autopsies in all of his papers. He was going through his brother's papers, and he found these. And he thought this is astonishing. And so he actually disseminated them. He said, "This is amazing. People need to know this." And I was able to get copies of those. And it was extremely scientific, extremely technical autopsies of these two creatures. But the one from the Columbus Day storm down near the California border was a female. And they autopsied it, but there have been so many accounts. Like, how many reports are there of like where somebody will hit one on the road, like a truck driver will smash into one, and then they stop, and then the people come and pick up the body, and you never hear about it again. It's all obfuscated. It's all covered up. And Stuart Love, as I said, explained to me the reason for that. Because if we admit that they're there, we've got a problem, Houston. Because what are we going to do about the Endangered Species Act? and so it's just been covered up. But when my, like 100 years ago, they weren't trying to cover it up. They kind of would ignore it, but you can read the way they wrote about it. It wasn't some government secret. It was just something you hear about, but it's like there's a lot of mysterious creatures like that in the world. Bigfoot is not one of them. The reason Bigfoot is of note is because it's big, and like, for example, there's ring-tailed ferrets on the Sixes River, but they're not officially there, but people see them every once in a while. And so there's animals like that, rare animals. And but when something is 8 to 10 foot tall, it's a bit intimidating. People don't like to know that there's something like that out in the woods. They like a nice, comfortable. We know a black bear is not that big of a deal. They don't get that big around here, and they just they run away usually, and you feel safe with that. And cougars, they'll usually leave you alone. They're very shy. But the apes, that's something that really bothers some people. They don't like believing they're there, and so they like to pretend that they're not there, which is fine. I think the Bigfoot don't mind at all.
Stan and I had a chance to catch up before this interview, and we talked, a little bit about how this interview was going to go, and just getting Stan connected with the format. But we also touched on a few things here, and we don't have a whole lot of time left to get into this. But when I saw the map come in this documentary, I immediately recognized that map from a witness I spoke to, a guy by the name of Don in Coos Bay, Oregon, circa, I believe it was 2010 timeframe. And Stan is the only other guy that I've ever seen have a map like that. Now, Stan, you've had a chance to look at the video I sent you. I don't have the map anymore. As these things go, the paper trail usually, is shifty at best, or just completely gets deleted or wiped out or disappears. And this map is one of those kind of things, but I got a video of it. So talk about the map, and
sure.
I'm curious about your findings.
Yeah, well, the one that I have is not the same one that you have, but it's the same background. And there are some notable differences. Like my map, it's obviously the same BLM map that shows the patchwork of the land, how it's distributed, and the rivers and the coastline and everything. But my map has the roads on it, and that other map does not. But it's obviously the same background. So those two maps were two separate accounts. Two separate recordings of sightings, and they may have transposed one onto the other, like recorded on there. But the map that you showed me, it says you are not alone, and the one that I have that was from the BLM office in North Bend, it said back by popular demand, and both of them kind of whimsical lines that they threw in there. The one that I had, I knew about it for a year and a half, and I was like doing my begging, manipulative, persuasive best to talk one of the federal or state officers that I knew, because I work on their plumbing, etc., into letting me have a screenshot of that map. And finally, this one federal officer that was nearing retirement, he said, "Yeah, I'll do that." So he gave me that screenshot, which you have seen, which is in the movie. And he was very careful, though. He said, don't pass this around here. But at this point, it's a moot point. It doesn't matter anymore. But the map that you have there that's in that YouTube video, that's far higher quality. And it's got a lot more detail. And my map has about 70 sightings. And, of course, then the icons are the same on both maps. But Southwest Oregon just has a lot of Sasquatch living here, and because when you think about just anecdotally the number of people, these are only sightings that are officially recognized by the government, and that would be just a tiny tip of the iceberg of what has gone on. I mean, my collection of sightings, and I'm still collecting more. The Steve Nibbler sighting. southwest of Roseburg is one for the records. That's an astonishing sighting. Unfortunately, it's not photographed, but he's a very credible witness. And so there's so many different sightings like that. And if you think, well, these are the ones that the government on their BLM map, there's 2 of them now, officially recognized, you know that there's going to be so many more. Just things that people see. You know, how many people that going down the highway and there's an ape standing by the side of the road. I've heard so many accounts about that. And every once in a while, there's a few accounts where people will get a video of one of them dashing across the road, and it's not mistakable. It's not a bear. You can tell by looking at it, or racing up a hill or something like that. You can see that there's so many accounts. So the iceberg theory, 5/6 of everything is invisible under the surface, and so this is a very fast, very intelligent, very elusive creature. And so here's the number of times the government officially says, yeah, one of our people saw one. And then here's all these other accounts where citizens actually were willing to admit that they saw one, because very few people are willing to admit that they saw one, in my experience. Only a small minority. So if you do the math, they're ubiquitous. They're everywhere, and that kind of makes sense. It's just like there are so many cougars. I mean, everybody has been seen by a cougar, but very few people have seen a cougar. I have this the shirt that I really like is the one with a Bigfoot, and it says, "I saw a human, but no one believes me." And there are very few people that will divulge what they've seen because they know what's going to happen. People that are pretending that they don't think they're real are going to make fun of you, and who wants that? What's the upside? There isn't one. So you just keep it to yourself until you run into somebody like Stan, who talks to you very plainly and says, "Yeah, I know that they're real," and then finally they'll say, "Well, here's what happened to me." They want to tell somebody, but they don't want to be ridiculed or dismissed.
Hey, Stan, I got a question for you.
Yeah.
You're not a biologist, but you're obviously highly informed. And, based on the maps that you've seen, the descriptions and stories from experiencers and people in your area, do you think you're able to, anticipate any sort of like migration patterns, or, where you might be able to anticipate a sighting, or maybe if it's not you,
Well,
maybe you've got people from Department of Fish and Wildlife that can clue in on that stuff and really kind of know their behavior and where they might show up next.
Yeah, good question. Excuse me. I have looked and I've inquired, and I have not seen patterns in just the anecdotal experience that I've had talking to people and finding out what the stories are. Is I know that there are accounts, like, for example, up in Washington, there are theories about Bigfoot migration going east and west with the seasons, and down here I haven't really seen the evidence of that. They're just there. They're in the woods, and there are places where they are more populous than others. And the way we know that, or the way we surmise that, is because there are more sightings. There's a canyon out in Central Oregon where there's a guy that has a business here in town. It's a tire and lube business, and he's from that area, and he had a very awesome Bigfoot encounter there in that canyon. And then completely independent from that, a guy that is a truck driver that delivers plumbing goods here, he went over there and went hunting one time, and he had a terrifying experience in that exact same canyon. He said, we were chased out of there at a dead run by Bigfoot. And he said, I will never go back. So, we know that they're there. I mean, we've had 2 people that have seen them there, but I haven't really seen the evidence. And why would they migrate? I don't know how familiar you are with the world down here, but the difference between summer and winter here on the South Oregon coast is 15 degrees. I'm a connoisseur of wild edibles. I'm really big on that, and I teach classes on wild edibles because I like using electricity. I like using supermarkets. I just don't like depending on them. And so, there is so much food available in the forest here, and never mind the fact that the Bigfoot can evidently outrun a deer, and they're omnivores. They'll eat anything, but there's a lot of food available in the forest here. There's different kinds of, a bunch of different kinds of berries. There are 2 different kinds of weight sustaining nuts, and there's all kinds of roots and plants that you can eat. And so the Bigfoot has plenty of food here. And don't get me started about the earthworms. They're giant, and they'll eat anything. So I don't really see a reason for them to migrate. And we know they build shelters. I've had reports of some of the shelters that they've built in this vicinity, very obvious shelters, not made by man. You guys know what I'm talking about. There's so much documentation of Bigfoot shelters, some of them really decrepit and broken down, some of them in pretty good shape. But the commonality is there are no saw or axe marks on any of the wood, and they're built, and they're obviously built as a shelter for something really big. And so, they just live here. They just don't like being around people. They don't like being seen, and they will disappear in a New York minute if they think that you see them. But the thing is that almost all the time, they're going to see you. I mean, there's probably all kinds of times when I've walked very close to one. I would never know it. It's up in a tree, or it's behind a bush, hiding and waiting until I go past. It would be very, very easy for them, as intelligent as they are, to hide. That's what Stuart Love was saying. He said they're so intelligent and so elusive. There's no hope of us ever being able to do a population count, and we know it. And he's the senior biologist for the ODF&W.
Stan, throughout I was just going to ask you a quick question. This is Toby.
Yeah.
Throughout the interview here, we've referred to them as apes. And I wonder along the way here if there's something frustrating calling them apes because of this other conundrum of them being upright and not having a divergent big toe, and having, sometimes people report strange glowing eyes and building shelters and maybe even language if we're going to Ron Moorhead. Are there anything, any reports or anything that strikes a chord with you that talks about a humanity or something beyond ape?
Well, I have a photograph of one of their skulls, and it's actually next to a gorilla skull, and they're virtually identical, except the Bigfoot skull is huge. And, they're just really, really big animals. But there are so many, just in the last 40 years, 35 new ape species have been discovered in the world. And do you guys know who Cliff Barrickman is?
Yes, we're aware of his name.
Cliff Barrickman, Finding Bigfoot on the TV show. I've
heard.
Anyway, he's quite the scientist, but he went to the island of Sumatra, and they discovered an ape there, and he actually did some of the initial research and documentation of it. And it's about 5 foot tall, and it's completely upright. It just walks upright, has very strange feet. But the local people there, it was on the northern part of Sumatra Island in Southeast Asia, and the locals said, yeah, we know what they are. It was just a common thing, but the outside world didn't know what they were. Here's an example. As soon as the gorillas in Africa were documented, scientifically documented, how long did it take before the man on the street in Europe understood that it was a real species? It was 150 years. It took a long time. People just, they didn't really accept that, and it was very well known. And so there are lots of things like that. But in all of the I've learned that they do have language, and apes do. I mean, that we would call it gibberish. Of course, it's probably not gibberish for them, but they do communicate. And there are lots of animals that have very intricate and articulate communication. It's just not the way that we communicate in terms of with syntax and grammar and things like that. That's extremely complex, and different languages, like even pods of whales. They will have distinct dialects in all their whistles and sounds that they make with each other that are recognizable for each group of whales. They kind of have their own communication style. But everything that I can see in terms of the skeletal remains that have been that can be seen of the Gigantopithecus, it's just an extremely large ape, has the same ape skull, and I don't see them as something like a divergent from Homo sapiens, or a predecessor to Homo sapiens. I don't see any link whatsoever. The missing link, which of course we were taught about that in school, is still profoundly missing. And the whole idea of there being a development where one species, one completely kind of animal, like a reptile, would turn into a bird or something like that. It's an idea, it's a theory, but it has zero documentation in the real world, and in DNA, it's just not there.
No, I would.
Anyway,
I would totally agree with that. And we should mention too that
I'm opining here. But,
no, that's fine.
yeah, these are apes. And also there are plenty of people that have seen them, especially like I have some friends here in town, and they watched one. It was an obvious juvenile crossing Highway 101 lickety split on all fours. That's what apes do. Especially the young ones. I mean, there's a really great video of an infant Bigfoot from Pennsylvania, and it looks like a spider monkey up in this tree, and the mom, the female, is pacing back and forth underneath. It's a very clear video, and you can watch that. My wife is actually the one that discovered the baby skittering around way up in this tree at the very top of the video. No one even noticed it, and people were it was a video, a really well-known video. I don't know if you've ever seen it before, but people were wondering, well, this looks fake. I mean, why would she be walking back and forth? It was an obvious female. The thing is, just someone in a suit trying to get attention? No, she was guarding her infant that was up in the tree way up above her. And Teresa's the one that figured that out. It's like, yeah, and she actually contacted the people and said, look up. And I think a lot of people that think it just disappeared, it's magical. No, look up. It's going to be up in the tree. And that's my view of it. I don't disrespect the sincerity of people that opine differently, and think that there are supernatural aspects to this. Everything that I have learned is that they're just the same species that's been here for thousands of years, and we find their bones. We find their bones in the fossil record. They're identical, Gigantopithecus. And it's natural for people to attribute supernatural things to them because of the cryptid and mystical nature of the whole thing. It's hidden. But men all around the world have been doing that forever. You can go to any culture. Like I travel in India a lot. And in India, boy, I tell you what, they talk to the cows. They talk to the cobras. They talk to the rats. And they're convinced that they hear them because they have this supernatural overlay over them. And that's just how they roll down there. And I look at it and go, it's just a rat. It's just a cobra. It's just a cow. The cow doesn't understand you. But they pray to them, and you can look at the American Indian culture. They had all kinds of fascinating, mystical overlays pertaining to animals that we recognize as just animals, but that they had mystical ideas about them, and to try to help them explain their world, because they understood the world is more than what appears to the eye. They believed that we live in a spiritual universe, and it was natural to think, well, that might have something to do with some of these animals, because we've seen this mysterious stuff. And so I think because of the mysterious nature of Bigfoot, it's natural for people, like a lot of the people that are looking for Bigfoot are looking for UFOs. And so it's no surprise that they encounter them together, and different lights and things like that. Those things don't surprise me at all, because we do live in a mysterious spiritual universe. I've seen so much stuff, especially in India. Absolutely, just supernatural miracles right in front of my eyes. I know that I am not a secular person in terms of just this is just a natural world. Oh no, there's
Stan,
much more to it. Anyway, I've been going on here.
It's Brett. It's Brett. Listen,
Yeah.
we had the most wonderful, most successful screening in Bandon, this past July, and
It was fun.
We want to do that again. Obviously we've been working on our sequel to A Flash of Beauty, and what's really interesting, and we only have a few minutes left before we need to wrap up, but what's really interesting is we were approached by some guests of that screening who had a very sensational story for us. And so we get many stories from many people, and we want to follow up each and every one of them, and sometimes we're unable to. But this was one that they were insistent on, and so we followed up with them. We had a phone call, and long story short, we traveled back down to Coquille, and we documented this story. And I can't give away too much right now because it's going to be probably the ending of our film. But what I can tell you, Stan, is it is the most supernatural, sensational story that I have ever heard in my entire life. I mean, aside from anything obviously that's biblical in nature, but this story that has happened, and we've heard actually just recently within the last couple of weeks that there's been more extremely strange things happening in the vicinity of Coquille. So I just want to tease you a little bit that we're hot on the case of some supernatural mystery and wonderment, and this is a story that might set the world ablaze. And so we cannot wait to hear your take on it and what some of your thoughts are. And those guys, those two gentlemen that had the experience, will be there in Bandon when we do another screening. So we're gonna want to talk to them and get their thoughts and opinions. But this one's truly, I mean, if there's a left field, Stan, this one's beyond left field. I'll just leave it at that.
It's a paradox for me because I'm the respectful counterpoint to the woo factor regarding Gigantopithecus, but on the other hand, you're not going to meet anybody that is more mystical than me in terms of the spiritual universe that we live in. I mean, demons and angels, and I mean, I'm a young Earth creationist. You can't get any more supernatural than that. And Teresa and I, not to overshare here, but Teresa and I have way too many times been put in situations where we had to cast demons out of people and where we have seen astonishing miracles. And so I know that there are all kinds of spiritual realities in the world. But I want to hear, I want to listen, I want to meet people, and I want to hear what they have to say. And everyone, there's no reason to doubt what they're saying. Why would they make something like that up?
Yeah, this is absolutely correct, and that's the way that we feel about these two gentlemen who, again, I'm not going to mention any names, but he's both of these guys are pillars of their community as well, and they're well known, and he's a small business owner, and they had this sighting at 10 o'clock on a Monday morning in November, and what they saw was you'll definitely be scratching your head on this one. This is a wild one.
Well, also, I hope someday you'll be able to sit down with Steve Nibbler and have him tell you the salient details of that amazing sighting he had with high-power binoculars there southwest of Roseburg.
Stan, you're more than a theologian, a plumber, a spiritual guru of sorts. You can.
Well, also, I'm a poet and a fiddler.
Well, I was going to bring up the poetry part of yourself because we have some unfinished business.
I've got the song here if you want me to sing it.
Well, let me set the stage because they don't know what's coming. Along the way here, Stan has repurposed some lyrics from a Simon and Garfunkel classic. So without further ado, to close out our show, Stan, why don't you, in tune if you can, I don't know if you want to be Simon or Garfunkel or both, but read this or sing this song regarding Sasquatch.
All right, with the voice I have left, here it is. Hello, Sasquatch, my old friend. I've come to search for you again, because that glimpse of you behind the trees makes me yearn to learn your mysteries, and the footprints you leave planted in the ground still abound, but I prefer some photos. Through rugged woods I hiked around, just hoping for some sight or sound. As I slowly lost the last daylight, a flying boulder landed to my right, and a wood knock made it clear that you know I'm here, tasting fear. But I held on for photos. With a big night scope on my head, I fumbled for my infrared when a rotten stench assaults my face, as I heard your nearby heavy pace, when my sight was blocked by a dense wall of leafy brush. It's too much. There went my chance for photos. Then after that there was no sound, just big mosquitoes all around. I was so sure I'd get a video, because I knew the perfect place to go. But my only score was a cast of a 10-inch foot on a root, 'cause you don't pose for photos. There you go.
Oh my gosh, it's so good. I
Wow.
mean,
That was
Stan, we need to
amazing.
get you in the recording
Amazing,
studio. That was fantastic.
Yeah, anybody that wants to I can, with a better voice, my voice is really shot, as you can tell. Anybody that wants to use that song, they can use it unattributed. Anybody that likes it, I can send them the
we
lyrics.
love it. No, I think we're going to hear it on Spotify soon. Stan, I can't appreciate you enough for entertaining us towards the last part of this interview and the wealth of knowledge and naming the documentary, for crying out loud. It's been a
Yeah.
real pleasure, and it's not the end. And if I can see you out in Bandon for part 2, I'll do it. I look forward to meeting you.
We're not private people. We're not private people. Come by anytime.
I love it. Not private people. The Sasquatch are. This has been a lot of fun. Thanks again, Stan, and we will talk soon.
Appreciate it.
All right, bye-bye.
Give a
Thanks,
to
Stan.
Bye-bye, everybody.
This has been a Resonance Productions podcast. If you have questions, comments, or your own encounter story you would like to relay to the show, email us at bigfootrevealpod@gmail.com. Also, if you're just discovering us, you can watch our documentary, A Flash of Beauty, Bigfoot Revealed, on most major video streaming platforms.